We'll call the City Council work session meeting to order. Clerk, please call the roll.
Councilperson Whitman.
She's excused.
Kilgrave. Here. Vining.
She's en route, has a computer item.
Remaining.
Here.
Moore. Felder.
Here.
Mayor Clark.
Present. So we have a work session agenda. We have a presentation this evening, and I'll just go right to Mr. Pastou to introductions and lay the foundation for the discussion.
Thank you, Your Honor. We do have a PowerPoint presentation tonight to go through the proposed safety facility police edition that was initiated back in January. City Council appointed a number of members to serve on the steering committee associated with that, including the mayor, Councilmember Steelgrave, Councilmember Vining, Clerk Treasurer Lavoie, myself, Assistant City Manager, Finance Director Ed Sell, City Engineer Patrick Lewis, Public Safety Director Chad Tolstead, Communication Director Jody Egan, and then Community and Economic Development Director Mark Cochran. So this project has been ongoing. I want to say probably sometime in February, the council provided funding for Redstone Architects to work toward a schematic design associated with the facility proposed on East 3rd Street. As in the past, we have worked with AUK Construction. They were the construction manager at risk for the fire station project, and I think by all accounts, they were really wonderful to work with, plus they did a great job on the construction cost estimates associated with that project. We had also worked with them on some of the other alternatives that we'll briefly mention during the presentation. So that's been kind of the functional team with us. Tonight, we have Chafra Kowalski with Redstone Architects, who's been right with the project from the start and kind of a lead working with not only the steering committee, but certainly Director Tolstead and his staff, which is including fire personnel as well, with some of the layout and technical issues associated with the building design. So if we could go through the next one. Thank you. So again, here's the outline that we're proposing. Certainly, I've got through the first introductions, but also I'm going to talk just very briefly about the project title, the rationale for the project itself, alternatives considered, and then we're going to go into the programming associated. Again, Ms. Kowalski will work with, go through that with council along with Public Safety Director Tolstead in looking at that. And then from there, we would move into the proposed site plan, floor plan for the building, elevations that will be presented. Toward the end, we'll review the cost estimates. Mr. Lewis will have a handout for you. It's actually, the handout's already in front of you on the last page. And then Mr. Sell's going to talk a little bit about the project financing recommendation, and then I'll kind of wrap it up as far as next steps. So part of it is we've had some discussion related to the project title. I don't think it's insignificant, certainly worthy of a brief discussion or recognition, but it is a public safety facility / police addition. It does integrate many of the aspects of the working relationship with the public safety department involving both the police and fire. I think when we go through some of the floor plan, that'll come up with discussion with Director Tolstead and Ms. Kowalski as well. So I think it's important to recognize it moves forward with the public safety operation that the council approved last year, and that operation now is incorporated into the design itself. So just, again, we talked briefly with this during our steering committee, coming up with what we think would be an appropriate project title for it, and this is what we had come up with. So the next will be the ration. Talk a little bit about so some of this you've already heard from me in the past, but I think it's bears reiterating that there's essentially four aspects to it, some of them more important, obviously, than the other. But just as far as background, we've had a shared facility with the Sheriff's Department now going on 47 years. So we went into that facility in the mid-'70s. And so, we had an initial, I believe, 20-year lease. It subsequently expired. We do go year to year. We've got a good working relationship with the county, and certainly there's a good working relation with the Sheriff's Department. But at the same time, there's no guarantee that we'll be there forever. And I think when you get into some of the programming, you'll hear a bit about the existing deficiencies from a space standpoint, but also just an inefficient layout with the current facility that we're at. And so for those two reasons, the existing facility, it may be time to consider looking at something new. I think the bigger driver in a lot of this is certainly the DTE plant decommissioning. They're going to be submitting later this fall their integrated reliability system plan, looking at what the time frame they may contemplate decommissioning. Right now, it's 2040. When I met with them and a number of other folks a little over a week ago, they've kind of hit it somewhere in the 2030s. Not specific, but we certainly within the next couple of months we're going to know. And as I've talked probably for the last 3 or 4 years at the capital improvements program presentations, essentially, imploring Planning Commission as well as the council is that given this reality with the plant decommissioning, we do need to get our infrastructure up to date as much as we can, knowing full well that operation, which funds 47 or 42% of our general fund now, it used to be 48, will be continuing in a decline. So I think you've done a lot of things related, certainly with the street millage that's been done, certainly the fire station that was completed a few years ago, and a number of other projects, park projects that the council has been working on. But key to it is trying within the next several years to get the infrastructure in a condition that when and if, to what extent that plant is decommissioned, that at least the infrastructure and the ability to continue and maintain high-level services for our community continues to go forward. The other thing with it is, the third item is just the operational benefit. I think a better integration of police, fire, public safety operations, having them on the same site, able to work close together, get comfortable knowing each other, I think is an added improvement. Again, as I mentioned, and it'll cover with when you look at the floor plan and the layout, it's just much more functional layout for police operations. And then lastly, there is no land acquisition associated with it. Not only is there no cost, but there is no environmental work that we're going to have to do with it, nor any other civil engineering that's associated with a new property acquisition. So we know the site, we're comfortable with going forward. And again, we'll talk a little bit about that with the alternatives. And then lastly, and we've kind of mentioned it, but certainly on Washington Street, the county has its parole and probation offices. And with our departure, I would anticipate, based on my conversations with the county administrator, that they would likely move that operation to a secured facility out of the town square. So those are the rationale for considering the project. The next one is with Mr. Lewis and I will briefly talk about it, mostly Mr. Lewis, the alternatives considered and the analysis with the shared facility with the sheriff.
All right, thank you, Vince. I'll take all four if you'd like, and
Yeah,
feel free to add anything in that I haven't talked about. So obviously, the first question would be: have we looked at the existing space? And obviously, Mr. Pastu talked about some of the disadvantages and some of the things we could free up by moving from the city-county building, and that's free up additional space for them to backfill some other operations that are currently downtown. So the first thing we looked at was analyze the space layout, the footprint that they're using, versus what our needs actually are. And one of the things I think that should be noted is we're working somewhere along the lines of 8,000 square feet. Is that approximately the right number, Chad? So we're contemplating the needs of our police department section is 22,000 square feet in a new building. So that's a significant gap in what we should have versus what we do have. So with a site like that, there's some alternatives. There's some, I don't want to say crazy alternatives, but I know it was brought to my attention, and I remember seeing this, that building was designed to accommodate an additional floor if desired. So that's one thing we could theoretically do, is build up. As you might expect, the cost for that would be significant. Furthermore, even renovating the space we have is not without cost. And those were not costed out in intricate detail, but it was another one of those situations similar to where we were with the central fire station replacement, where when you start to get into rehabilitation costing, getting close to the number that you would need for a new build, it just doesn't make sense, especially when you're that shy of space. So realistically, that's not a very good option moving forward. So we were looking at moving to a different facility. The first property then under number 2, which kind of came to our attention because the property was for sale from First Merchants Bank, and that was the property at 212 East Front Street. And while the city did pick that up for entirely different reasons, subsequently, we analyzed that site first to see whether the existing building could be used, because if it could, that could represent a significant savings. While we had initially hoped that we could reuse that building, both the layout and the total space was, again, deficient for our needs. So by the time we did actually cost this out through our architects, Redstone and Auk, took a cut at this, getting close to more than, I don't want to say a year ago, but getting close to a year ago, the numbers on that were in the range of 10 to 12 million. That was off the cuff. And when you see the numbers that we've got here for the facility that we are proposing, that's, if any savings were realized, it would be very minor, and that would be shoehorning into a building on a site that lacks some of the advantages of the current fire station site. So essentially, it was cost neutral if we were to go to 212 East Front Street without the advantages of being in proximity to the fire department. And additionally, and I'll point this out when we get into the cost details, there are some shared spaces with the fire department, and that does cut down on the square footage necessary. So we'd actually be building a square footage of 2,000 or 3,000 square feet more if we were to build not with the fire department, because you've got some shared exercise room space, some community room space that can be overlapped with a building on the same site. So that was the one that was done the most analysis, and we came out pretty much dollar for dollar, no difference. We were aware in the interim in there that the Monroe News building was for sale. I don't remember the purchase price, but it was around, I think, $1 million.
1.2.
1.2. Okay. And at first cut, it seemed like a very, very nice building because there was a lot of renovation that was done inside. But there were a couple of, I'll call them fatal flaws for the usage as a police station. One of those is there's just no parking in close proximity, so we would lack any real significant secured parking. Another thing that was becoming a problem is that from a security standpoint, you wouldn't want someone to be able to hop from rooftop to rooftop, and the adjacent buildings around there were in very close proximity. You could actually jump down from the roof onto that. Now, you could make some accommodations to prevent that, but it would be very difficult to harden that building in the similar fashion that we would need to for similar to a new build. So the combination of those factors, as well as the renovations that were done inside, worked well as an office use, but they didn't work out well for our functional adjacencies for the operations that we had. So it's a great building for someone else, but it really doesn't work for our police operations. So, and then of course, we went back to the 911 East 3rd Street site, which is the fire station number 1, and remembering, of course, that building was built to accommodate an addition. And as Mr. Pastu pointed out, we have the property. We know what's there. There are a few civil considerations, some excavated foundations that we'll need to take care of, but those are already covered in the costs. And from a plus side, because we've done all the site work on there, we know what's in the ground. And that's a big issue, especially in an older community like Monroe, where we've got anything can happen once you start digging in the ground. But this site, we know what's there because we've done the soil borings, we've done the testing. It's just removal of the old foundations from Lincoln School. So those were the sites that were seriously considered for this usage. Did I miss anything of substance?
I think you covered it well, that we did look at these other alternatives and pursued forward with 911 East First. So thank you.
I'm going
The next piece on it would be Tefra Kowalski talking a little bit about the programming for the law enforcement aspect of the project.
Good afternoon. We started the project by interviewing the police department and the fire and worked through programming, figuring out what spaces would be needed for the facility, what spaces were already there that could be shared. And we used our space standards to determine the size and the amount of space that was going to be needed for the police department. So we went through our programming, our interviews with all of the staff that would be using the facility, and we came up with some of the shared facilities, some of the new spaces that would be needed, and came out to be around 22,000 square feet. So after we took the 22,000 square feet, we took into consideration parking, public access, other site features that would be needed on the site, and decided that it would fit best as a two-story facility next to the existing fire station. So we have a one-story footprint that connects to the fire station, the existing fire station, that shares some pathways, that shares an office and an exercise room. So we've got some connection with the building that they can move from the PD into the fire and from fire to PD, and the shared training room. There's an access to the training room. We have the connections that are right in the middle. To save money, we didn't go all the way and extend the whole building and connect it all. So this saves us a little bit more money with the minimal connections needed. And then the second floor sits on top of the first floor for the fire or the police department. So it does not go over the fire station at all. It's just right on top of the police department. So one of the big considerations was the public and secure separations. So how to bring the public in and have them have controlled access to the functions for fire and police. So in the green, they come into the lobby, they have and access to the lobby. The blue areas are controlled, meaning you have to be let into the facility for a specific use or of a specific reason. And then the yellow and orange are controlled police functions. So those are secure, and the staff would be secure and not have any public access to those spaces. There we go. The second floor has some controlled spaces for the public. So on the second floor, we have the admin and we have the interview suite for the detectives. So the elevator and the circular, or the vertical circulation is controlled. You have to be allowed onto the elevator, and then you travel up and you're escorted either to the admin or to the interview suite. So that would be another controlled area. And then the yellow is the secure staff, sworn officers or staff for the facility.
Thanks, Teffer. Which, just back and forth arrows get me?
On the right-hand side.
All right.
So point it that way.
All right, thank you. Honorable Mayor, City Council, Chad Tolstead, Director of Public Safety. Thank you, Tefra. What I'm going to do is kind of break down with you, and Clerk Lavoie, my apologies, break down for you some of the site plan and the floor plans and what they mean, why we believe this needs to be updated. As you're looking through I can tell you're looking through your plans, trying to get what's what. We'll start with why we want to be in the same facility as the fire department as well. Why we want to put a police addition onto this is not just for the public safety operations, which is, we know we're crossed over training. We know our PSOs do firefighter training as well, but also for emergency services as a whole. So we do a coordination of a response. So it's been alluded to when other people talk to team, getting people into one place so we can have these conversations ahead of time and be better prepared to serve the citizens. It's joint crossover training activities, communications, along those lines. So similar to some of the renovations that have been done to City Hall, as you enter the lobby for the public safety, you'll enter through the public safety lobby area, which is public safety records. So what public safety records does, it services both police and fire services. So no longer will we have a separation of the two departments. We're one department with the Division of Police and Fire, which will now be serviced by a public safety records division. And of course, you'll be greeted with a very friendly staff, as always, that will be able to service whatever clerical needs you might need. That takes the lift off of the fire services, who doesn't currently have a clerical staff within their station, takes that lift off of them and puts it where it needs to be with our support services. So as you see, you enter the lobby, you can see one of the first rooms you come to is a report writing room. That report writing room is significant. As many of you, I think everybody here toured the police station, know that we don't have a private area, or all we have is a semi-private area in which people can come into the lobby to speak to an officer or to talk about a complaint, whether it be criminal or civil. This provides a safe environment, a private environment, respectful of our citizens. As well, you'll see we also have a secure separation for facilities between our staff in the public sector. So as you move through the blue area from left to right, you see our records department is expanded with our records supervisor having their own office as well. One of the most significant changes you'll see that we're looking to update is our evidence and processing. So as we toured our current facility, we have all these 4 areas. And the 4 areas are evidence prep, the dry room, evidence processing, and evidence holding. We have, those are spread out in our current structure in 3 different areas. So if any chief or director, if you will tell you that it will get a department in trouble or themselves in trouble, will be a chain of custody issues regarding evidence. So now we bring all those four areas into one area, which reduces that a greatly amount. So the evidence prep is just that. Officer brings in evidence off the road, they prepare it, they place it into evidence. If it needs to be dried, if it's soiled, has liquid on it, that's what the drying room is for. It's just dried, then put into evidence processing, then into evidence holding area. So you see having those all in one area as opposed to carrying them from the second floor to the first floor, or the first floor to the second floor. These are all now combined into one area of the building.
Are those, if I may, just the lockers in between the evidence prep and the processing, again, maintaining the custody once the officer delivers that to the officer responsible for the evidence?
So the significance of the lockers that Mr. Pastu is speaking of is that. So when we have that evidence that's collected, once the officer is done with it, places it into a 2-way locker. That key goes in, if you will, key goes in, that key goes out, then that key is put into some place the officer can't gain access to it again. It's then away from that officer. The evidence processing or the evidence officer has a key for the other side, right? So you're talking a much more secure facility, which are access controlled. So not any officer can access area of these evidence processing or even the drying room, and especially the evidence holding area. We have 2 people that have access to the evidence holding area, and I'm not one of them. That should show you how secure that facility is. It's our evidence officer and our administrative officer, the only 2 that have access into there. So to have the lockers and some of the updates we're doing with this thing is essentially important for the processing of evidence in the chain of custody. So just going to some more, you'll hear words like functionality. I think Mr. Lewis talked about some of that stuff. So as we come into the building here, so do you see the yellow boxes there? To the left is there, that's a records bureau. So this is a area that's controlled, has access control to it, the yellow area there, and that's your professional standards supervisor, who also is oversees the community program, community services officers, and those are significant to have those in that area there because we want them accessible to the public. And you also see they're right next to the patrol captain's area. That's also a significant change within the change, because all these things overlap one another. So as what affects the community officer, what affects the professional standards captain who oversees all the events, affects the day-to-day operations, which is your patrol captains. If you move to the north into the blue area, you'll see some of the areas here. So we currently have some of these facilities, some of these rooms, which are spread out throughout the building. What this does is provide patrol equipment storage, the duty gear at the top, to the briefing room, which is AKA the squad room. Now they're all in one area. So when we need to access some of our emergency equipment, some of the things we use for everyday use, and some of the things that we aren't using on a day-to-day basis, but are there for emergency equipment, these rooms and how this is laid out facilitates that. The armory itself, currently to get at the armory, in our current facility, and to get at some of our other emergency equipment, you go through the exercise room to gain access into the armory. This armory is much more strategically placed within the building itself, which can be accessed from the first floor. Items from the armory can move out to the garage and then taken where it needs for retraining or otherwise. The locker rooms are also an updated process currently. If you recall, we have one shower for each locker room we have. This updates that. So now we have shower facilities that are doubled, and they're secure for each officer to be able to shower in. We also have extra lockers for visiting personnel, and this has also provides updated amenities within the locker room area. So the defensive tactics room. So when you think of defensive tactics room, think of de-escalation training. So much of the focus now in law enforcement today is focused on de-escalation, and de-escalation for good reason. So we have verbal de-escalation, and we also have physical de-escalation as well. Our officers are currently training in jiu-jitsu, which we provided to them. But part of that is, how do we deal with somebody who's elevated this high, or if an officer is this high, how do we de-escalate down? This is that training facility. This is that room we do it in. So we train here. So when we get out into the roadway and we're dealing in real time, we know how to handle. So this is an addition to the program. Also, in addition, would be the administrative. So now, being a public safety program, we're moving the administration, meaning fire commander, God willing, police commander, and some of these other upper command all into one area, so we have these conversations. These conversations are had at this level now before bad things happen. Man-made or natural disasters occur in any jurisdiction. So we're having these conversations ahead of time as opposed to when they're occurring. So by us being all in one location, we have the discussion, and it makes for a better function of operations. Moving to, this is also an upgraded, is the interview area for the detectives. If you recall, in our detective bureau currently now, we do have an interview room, which is right off of the detective bureau. That is separated by a wall. So if someone is brought in there, victim is brought in, they're just right off of the interview room. So we have it's secure, so not anybody walking by cannot hear, but it's not something where it separates the victim or even the suspect from other areas. This provides that extra little area here that we need to move to help with the discipline of this profession. Sorry. Oh, there it is. Lastly, a couple other, I think Tefra touched on, maybe not, where the two buildings join up. There's an area in there that we didn't build out, but there is an area in there called a wellness officer. The wellness officer, which Council approved July 1st for the Department of Public Safety, is placed between the two buildings. That was not done on accident. That was done on purpose. The wellness officer's focus is on the wellness of not only police, but of fire as well. This provides this office area some place where the officers, firefighters can go to speak confidentially to a trained professional after they may have seen a tough call or having a tough time in life as well. So the wellness officer is a much addition that they have their own private office. The quiet room, don't we all wish we had a little quiet room? So the quiet room is for more for patrol officers who's located on the second floor. This quiet room is for an officer who has worked all night, gets off at 6 a.m., but is due back for jury duty, not jury duty, but a jury trial, let's say at 8:30 a.m. This gives them an area where they can go and rest for a couple hours before they're due back. It also provides a space for decompression for officers who are out on the road. I mean, recently we just had police and fire respond to a 4-month-old that had passed away. Sometimes that just requires some decompression. They may want to talk to a wellness officer, they may not, but an area for them to decompress as well. And this is the rendering provided by Redstone.
Teffer, do you want to go through that a little bit, or easy it is to see, but yeah.
kept the same materials that we used for the fire station, so it was one cohesive building. We're building it at separate times, there's a little bit of a separation, there's a connection, but we didn't want it to look like two separate buildings. So we did the best we could to keep some of the features from the fire station into the police station. Same brick, same, the rest of the same materials, same glass storefront entrance. We did use red doors for the fire station, so we used a blue banner on top of the entrance for fire, or for police, to kind of represent fire and police. So it's a public safety building, but you have all of your public safety functions represented. And the back side of the building, same thing. It's very cohesive, same materials. You have your fire entrance, your rear apron into the back doors, and then there is it'll be a secure parking lot for PD staff that'll have 2 gates and 2 entrances, one off of the rear apron for fire and one off of 3rd Street, 2nd Street.
2nd Street.
2nd Street. Sorry. And yeah, it'll have the same flat roof with the rooftop units, and yeah, just a nice cohesive building.
I will tell you, though, when we were going through the fire, we spent a great deal of time with a lot of the detail regarding the brick and the glazing and what have you. And certainly even during the steering committee, we talked a little bit, quite a bit about some earlier concepts with a little more glazing in there. And the steering committee, through the dialogue, decided let's, skinny that up a little bit. And I think it complements that as well. I don't know if did we pull the site plan into this? We're already up to the bond issue. Okay. The one thing with it is, what's that? No, that's fine.
I can go back.
I think the one thing with it that's significant is that we tried to use as much of the existing parking lot as we could, and I think the site plan changes the orientation more toward police records in that entry, knowing that on rare occasions will someone need to go into, you can still get there, but it's not the focus of entry for the vast majority of the public is the fire station. So this is one thing that's changed, I think, as a result of some of the design. So
Right, so when we did the fire station, we had a small parking lot for visitors for the fire station. And when we added the police building, we did lose a few of those parking spots, but it did put that parking lot right in front of the new public safety building. And then having a leadway, the entrance lead right from that parking lot into that public safety with a little bit more concrete plaza area than the fire. It's a very natural motion to go to the public safety building. So the fire station isn't going to take away from it being a public safety building. And we've incorporated a little garden path to the parking lot across the street. So there are multiple entrances to go to the public safety building. Did you want to talk about the monument or the memorial?
So one of the for the entrance that we did talk about placing in there was a memorial for the fallen officers we've had for the City of Monroe Police Department to honor their service to the community as well. That was an addition that we looked at. We hadn't come up with any renderings or anything like that, but just to honor their service to the community. And that would be part of that, again, that entrance that leads you up into the public safety records.
Well, Vince, before we switch the screen and get into the kind of the financial discussions and cost estimates, I want to see if there's any questions on the facility first, and we can have that conversation maybe before we get into the next conversation, maybe because we're right here. So
I have a question.
I'll start with Michelle, and then Kelly has a question too. Go ahead, Michelle.
Thank you. Where are you going to do your target practice at?
That's a good question. That was actually part of my presentation that I didn't bring up. But, one of the things you didn't notice that was in this building was a gun range. The gun range we would continue to use with the Monroe County Sheriff's Office, the building for that, in our outdoor ranges. So we're not looking to add that as a part of the, addition.
Question?
I couldn't remember. Is the back Second Street gonna be fenced in?
Yes, so it'll be secure parking for the police vehicles parked there and some of the staff.
For all the vehicles?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Thank you.
See, other questions? Brian?
Yeah, thank you, Your Honor. Are there any other items that you took out of the proposal because you thought maybe too much expense besides the range, or is there anything else that was in it that should be in it, or maybe something that's in it maybe we could subtract? I'm just kind of curious as to what we got going on there.
So we didn't include, you'll see that we didn't include any holding cells. There's no holding cells within the facility itself. We'll still partner with the Monroe County Sheriff's jail for any of those capacities. But some of the things that we did, I think Pat Lewis touched on it, was we have the shared area for the exercise room. While the exercise room that's currently there within the fire station wouldn't accommodate for all the additional staff in there, we just added on there between the two buildings as well. Plus, we're not adding a training room onto this. You have a small conference room on the second floor, but the training room is now much more of a shared space that can be used by both police, fire, or combined discipline. Therefore, was there anything else that we eliminated out of that?
No, we were able to get everything between the fire station having some of those spaces and bringing, sharing whatever sheriff functions were still available. It has everything that they need for the public safety building. We were able to accommodate it all.
And I think one of the benefits of having an architect like Redstone, who has done a number of police and fire facilities, is that they got the checklist when they do the programming. They go through it all and have that conversation with the client as to, okay, do we need this? Much like the gun range, much like the holding cells. Those are the type of things that and even the training, the community room, are all typically what you're going to find in a program that an architect would do if you were building a standalone police station. So, they got the checklist, they go through it all, and certainly talk about with the client what those needs are and what the alternatives are.
I know there's a couple more questions on the shared space, and it was earlier on in the rendering that was shown. So the community training room, which is still there, of course, it's there currently. The exercise room was expanded, but it was part of that center area in the wellness officer. So that's the crossover going from one division to the other, from fire to police and police to fire, and allows access between the personnel. So that's those. I don't think I'm missing any of those. Are the shared locations plus the causeways walking. So there was a couple more questions.
Go ahead, Counsel.
Kelly, and then I'll go with Michelle.
Did I miss the women's shower locker room? Did I miss that?
There's the shower room, or the locker room, the whole locker facility. Pat, do I have a pointer on this?
Yeah, just keep going left. I don't think you do.
Okay. So if you look at the men's shower room, or the men's locker room, there's 2 shower rooms in the lockers. The women have the 12 lockers with the
Okay.
shower room. And then there are smaller lockers for unsworn officer or unsworn staff, and they have a locker room or a shower room. And then there are 5 lockers. Those are for any visiting or anybody that is not identifying as a male or a female, just to satisfy anybody that doesn't feel comfortable in either one of those locker rooms. So that would be those 5 locker rooms, and then they would share that other locker room, or the shower room. The nice thing is each shower room is individual. So you can go in there, you can change, you can do whatever you want to do in your own space.
Nice.
So
And then, Chief, so if you have a suspect and you need to interview him or her, but they're going to be lodged, where are you going to interview them at?
So if we go back, let me go the right way to the renderings here. I know this was one of the concerns we had of walking
Just past it.
if you look on the left side of the rendering there, on the left side of the building, you'll see like kind of garage doors or sally port doors. So if somebody would had to be brought back, a suspect or victim or otherwise, they can be brought in discreetly through those entrances. And once they're through those entrances, they can be brought back in through the building, and then we can bring them into the detective suite on the second floor. Where you see on the yellow there where it says soft interview room there, that's where the interviews would take place within the detectives bureaus. And there's also facility in there for the officers to, I think Teffer's looking for another area.
I am looking for another area. It's not cooperating.
So you still have to drive them to the jail to lock 'em up.
Correct. Most of the work the officers do on the road is interviews are done there on the roadway. So they wouldn't necessarily have to be brought back to the station to be interviewed. The interviews are done right there on the side of the road. These would be more for like suspects or where a further interview is required. We want to bring them back, or they're not going to be lodged, and we just want to bring them back and talk to them, where we can record the interview, both audio and video, within the facility.
And if there is going to be somebody brought back that is either under arrest or will be shortly, if you notice the top right-hand corner of the image, there's the Sally Port, and then there's an orange, even more secure area. That's a little interview suite that is more hardened. That is not necessarily booking or holding, but there is an interrogation room in there versus an interview room. So there's a little bit more secure, hardened right off of the Sally Port.
Thank you.
Michelle?
The kitchen that the fire department currently has, will that be shared at all, or is it gonna be separate?
If you may,
you can
no, that's not a shared facility. That's still their private, that's still their quarters, so to speak. I hope one day to get there where we have some shared sit-down space time. That's our goal, is to get there. But no, that we have I think Teffer was looking for the second floor. We have our own, the police would have their own, what am I looking for?
Break hub.
Break hub.
So we have designed these break areas to be off of a corridor and not a room, so that it has access, so that when officers pass by, there's more engagement. There's more seeing who's in there. You stop by, you have a quick conversation. There's more interactions than just going into a room and sitting down and eating your lunch. So we have designed a separate area for police. Not all police and fire functions can be shared and shouldn't be shared. There are some things that police can't share with fire and vice versa. So we still keep them separate.
Other questions at this point before we move to the other part? Oh, Andrew?
Yeah, as a follow-up to that point, what facilities are going to be shared? Obviously, the steering committee decided to go this direction partially because we're going to have adjacency between the building, and that gives us certain synergies and the shared usage of certain facilities. So could you go over which facilities are going to be essentially shared use between the two departments?
Absolutely. So one of the areas was the community/training room. If you look at the largest blue section up on there, which is, has the adjoining from the green area in there, that's the community training room. That's one of the significant areas there, because any police facility, any fire facility is going to want to have a training facility within their own building. This is one of the big shared area. If you go just to the top of that, you'll see the exercise facility. It's kind of shaped like somewhat of like a weird U shape. That is also a shared facility. So any police facility, fire facility is going to want to have an exercise room or a training room within the facility. That's a shared space between the two groups as well. And then just north of that again is the wellness officer. The wellness officer is again shared space between both police and fire, that they would be accessible to both. The lobby area, I think, is most significant, is probably one of the biggest areas, the biggest functions we have of bringing the facility and its expansion is now the fire records, police records is a one-stop shop for all of our citizens to be able to come down and access this area here. And lastly, would be probably the administrative suite up on the second floor, as we're sharing that same area. So the fire commander is not in his own area in the fire facility. They're up there with myself, the director, with the fire commander. They're having the conversations with the administrative commander, which has administrative functions, both police and fire duties. Then we'll also have support staff within that area as well for both police and fire.
and if I may, the police staff being cross-trained as fire, if they're in the police functions, they're in police mode and they have to respond, they can quickly go directly through the building, through fire, into the gear room, grab their gear and go if they don't already have it already. But another important thing is what we're gonna do with this renovation is also incorporate the warm zone for fire staff. The fire staff, when they come back from an incident, they're full of carcinogens. So we're gonna have a place where they can decon before they go into their living situation. The cold zone. So that would be accessible for the fire or the police or the fire. So if the police come back from a situation where they responded, they're covered in whatever, they can go and they can decon and go into their facility to change the locker room without dragging that through the building. So there are a lot of shared spaces that aren't directly connected and functions that they would benefit from having right there.
In that exercise room, essentially everything west of column H there, that's the existing building. Part of the exercise room is there, but we need to add on to it because we're adding 50 people to that building.
That's correct.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Other questions? Okay, I think we'll move, time-wise, I think we'll move forward and see if there might be others related to this part of the presentation. And move on to the review and the cost estimates.
All right, so now you got the numbers guys coming up, the engineer and the finance director. Michelle, I don't know if we have that, we can project aux. There'll be 2 slides for Ed when I get done. Yeah, leave this one up, but if you can, the aux one first, and then go back to Ed. Thank you very much. So while Michelle's pulling that up, which I appreciate, there's about 20 pages of detail that go with the 1-page summary that is in your packets in front of you, and the clerk treasurer is going to display on the wall here. And that's an estimate from our construction manager, and that's the aux companies. And we use them on the fire station project, and we selected them chiefly because of their experience with projects of this type. So they do other public facilities, but in the public safety realm, they had significant experience, and that's why they were chosen, along with, of course, Redstone Architects. No, take your time. No problem. Because I can start to kind of roll out the discussions here. So I guess what I'm getting at is I'm not going to go through line by line here what constitutes these, but there is significant backup if any of you are interested in what comprise these numbers. So in front of the council members, and which will be on the screen shortly, is we had them number the line item descriptions, and I'll just briefly go over real quickly those that we have on here. And again, I apologize we weren't able to get this in the presentation. The size didn't fit very well because it's in portrait orientation. So,
Well, you can still
Okay.
work off of the handout that everybody
Okay.
has in front of them.
well, for council's benefit there, and we'll obviously I'll wrap it up there. So, line items 1 through 18 represent the different trades, if you will. They're essentially going to be different. That's more or less how they're going to construct the bid package, because construction managers will sort of perform the function that a general contractor would if this were a typical contract, and each one of those would be like a subcontract. But the construction manager will open bids for items 1 and 2 are site work, with line item 2 being site work for the 3rd Street lot, and that's the old Lincoln School parking lot, which we also own. Within line item number 1, site work is about $1.27 million. I wanted to note that $300,000 of that is the removal of the existing building foundation, which was what we talked about earlier. So that's something that's a known underground thing that would normally fall under contingencies, and we'll get to that in a moment with Mr. Sell's portion of this. The 3rd Street lot site work is about $405,000, and as we'll talk about in Ed's presentation here, we're going to pull that out for the time being, with the understanding that we could fund that if bids come in better than we expect. We could fund it, or we'll have to work on that slowly over time. Selective demolition, that's a fairly small number. You'll see trades like concrete, $551,000, masonry, $1.01 million. That's again, that's all the block work for the building. $825,000 in steel, $146,000 in carpentry, roofing $475,000. Doors and windows, $391,000. Interior finishes, just over $1 million. Specialties, it's a variety of different things, close to $300,000. And then you've got some equipment and furnishings. The elevator's $120,000. Plumbing is $432,000. Fire protection, $152,000. Your HVAC, that's probably your largest component at $1.366 million, and your electrical at $838,000. And again, these are detailed estimates. This isn't just, well, it's roughly this many square feet. This is their experience with buildings of this type, saying exactly how many plumbing fixtures are we going to have, how many different vents are we going to have, how many electrical outlets. These are all things that go into those, which I won't bore you with. Bottom line is, of those numbers, we come up to something about $9.4 million in base construction costs. And then there's a number that's general conditions, and that's about $600,000. And general conditions are all types of things like, included in this number, for example, is $75,000 allowance for winter protection. We're going to have this project's going to span roughly a year, so we're going to go through a winter. So we're going to need to have some things, other considerations with that. Things like setting up a construction trailer, bonds, all those types of things that with a project this size, you'll see those. Again, won't go into too many details. Subtotal of that coming in right around just under $10 million. So that is the construction cost. So that's takes you to line 21. Line 22, 23, and 24 are what we would refer to sort of as contingency items, but you'll see that they're broken down separately. The first one is a 10% estimating contingency. And that is essentially, this is what we think the building's going to cost, but we know that bids might vary. So that's where this is contained. And on a project this size, that's close to $1 million in estimating contingency. And then there's a 5% construction contingency on there. That is once you get started, you find things. And I feel very good about that number, that we will come in under that number, because your biggest single contingency items are typically your underground work. And what you're going to see with this is we know what's underground. I can't stress that enough. So we should be in better shape here than most other sites. And then line 24 is an escalation for construction start. That's a 5% number as well. And what we mean by escalation is these are today's numbers, but we know we can't start this project for close to a year. So we know there's going to be some cost escalation. Now, we could debate whether 5% is the right number here. You've seen some material escalation that's clearly beyond 5%. But keep in mind that there's labor in this too. It's not just materials, so that the escalation in those numbers has to be hedged a little bit. But that is, again, why you protect yourself with some contingency. So if you're keeping tabs, there's about a 20% bump that we've added to this based on contingencies. And so that gives you essentially another $2 million. And we're going to talk about that again when Mr. Sell comes up here. So subtotal line 25 gets you to $11.972 million. And then there's some other items under lines 26 and 27 that we have just said, well, the owner's going to handle those through other means. That's essentially testing. That'll be a separate contract. It won't be significant. That's not a six-figure contract. Neither are the permits. Because we're not talking about an Eagle permit. We're not talking about drain commissioner permits. We're not talking about road commission permits. We're just talking about our own internal building permits. So we haven't included those because they're fairly low numbers. And so basically then 31 is the CM fee. That's your construction manager fee, and that's about 2.6%. That's the cost of AUK to administer the contract on our behalf. So you take those all down to the line item 32, which is your subtotal for construction costs, again, is $12.283 million. You throw on 0.5% for insurance, that's just over $60,000, and you come to line 34, which is what you would refer to as your total construction cost, $12.345 million. Kind of comparing, I'll say apples to apples, that you can take from that number divided by the square footage of the building and come up with a per square foot cost of construction. And to any of those of you that have experience in the building trades, I never thought we'd see a number like this, but here's where we are. $540 per square foot. That's your construction cost. I'll give you a comparison number and then I'll give you a positive. The comparison number we paid for a contract administered starting September of 2018 for the fire station, roughly $5.1 million for a 15,561 square foot facility. That is $328 per square foot. Now, there's inherently some differences between a one-story and a two-story building and a fire apparatus room versus, I'll say, a little more fixture-intensive police station. But still, that's a 65% increase in what is essentially going to be 5 years if this project stays on schedule. So this is what we're dealing with. We can't control that, but that's why the bigger number here. Now, on the plus side, because our number is $540 per square foot, we talked about all those shared spaces. And I think we settled, it was roughly 3,000 square feet-ish. Is that, I'm looking for Chad and Teffer to give me some. Is that approximately what I had?
Well, if it's 3,000, you're talking 1.5 million.
If it's 3,000, we're talking 1.5 million. So for every 1,000 square feet we can share with the fire department's building that's already there, we're saving $500,000. So there's where we get into the distinct advantages this site affords us. So I just wanted to kind of make that point that we looked at that as a substantial cost savings. So taking off from item 24 or 34, and I won't go too crazy with all of the stuff below the line, but those are what we call the soft costs, which are not they're required, but they're not necessarily construction. We've got fees with DTE setting up service. We've got some testing there. Again, that's not in the construction side. That's offline. That's where we put it. Is $125,000 in testing. Permits. We've got to run data to it. That's $100,000. We said no hazardous abatement because we don't have any, it's a new build, so we're off the hook on that. And design fees, you're close to $1 million on design fees because the level of effort with a project this size is significant. And for comparison, I know we talked about the latest big number, the Carnes Park project, that was close to $500,000 for that project. So I think if you're talking cost of construction scale here, that's definitely in the ballpark. And so you add up some other reimbursables, your FF&E, that's your furnishings. We put a $200,000 allowance on that, and we put in there some kind of miscellaneous soft costs, and those are things that seem to show up as we come along that we'd like to leave some sort of allowance for that. And so you come up with an owner's soft cost of a little over $2 million, 2.2, which give us a project cost total of everything of about $14.5 million, which again, I know seems like a big number. But we're going to talk about, and Mr. Sell's going to talk about how we get there and some things that we're peeling off. But one thing I did want to make mention of is that contingency. So keep that in mind that a contingency is there in case we need it, but we may not need it. So that's why we're looking to pull some of that off of anything we might be looking to go to the voters with, because if we don't need it, we certainly don't want to ask for more than we need, but we have to make sure that money is set aside in case we do need it. So. Mr. Pastor, have I missed anything of significance?
No, I think you got it covered, teed it up for Mr. Sell to go into the financing options.
Okay,
Ed?
Mr. Sell, you're it.
There we are. Honorable Mayor and City Council, Ed Sell, Assistant City Manager, Finance Director. I get the fun part to tell you how we're going to pay for all this. Save the best for last, right? So, I mean, it should come as no surprise that with a $14.5 million project, it's going to require us to issue some debt in the form of bonds to pay for the project. And I guess what this is all leading up to, and I'll get into some details here, is that essentially at your next meeting, you're going to be asked to adopt a resolution that would approve putting some ballot language on the November ballot to pay for, which would levy a millage to pay for this. But Patrick kind of alluded to it, where the project in total was $14.5 million cost. We're only going to be recommending that that we issue bonds in the amount of $12.5 million. You saw some big contingency numbers there. So we're kind of saying, well, let's fund the contingency on our own. And we can do that in a couple different ways with some funding we have set aside. But so we're right off the bat saying we don't only want to issue bonds in the amount of $12.5 million. One of the ways we'll probably get there is there was that 3rd Street parking lot project in the original quote. We'll probably remove that. That is in the neighborhood of $500,000 right off the top. And so that would take us down. But from there, we'll look, obviously, to look at other project cost reductions if they make sense. But from there, we've got some money set aside from when we had the big tax appeal. We set some $2.2 million aside to deal with the effects of that. There's still $826,000 left in there, so we would dedicate that towards this project. Another source of funding is annually we get a personal property tax reimbursement from the state. And the way that's set up is we get 2 payments a year. We get 100% of what our reimbursement is calculated at in the fall. And then if there is extra money in the pot throughout the state, we get a second payment in May. And ever since that new formula has gone in place, we've always gotten that second payment. We've always gotten in excess of our 100% reimbursement. Last year, it was about $848,000 in excess of our 100% reimbursement. So as those continue, if those continue, that would, and they're at this point expected to, could dedicate that funding towards this project as well. Beyond that, we would look at the capital project fund or the general fund and look at their fund reserves and maybe take some money from there. And then, other things happened as we go along. For example, I already know that our pension, what we've projected for pension funding in at least one fiscal year into the future is quite a bit higher than what the actuary is saying we need to contribute. So, there's things like that happen where we might be able to set aside some funding as well for the project.
Just for clarity, we're not going to be contributing as much as what we had thought we would in future years.
Correct.
Yes. Okay.
Exactly. And so things like that, we project our budget for 5 years. As we see things like that, we can move the money towards this project if it makes sense. So what's being recommended, and you can go to the next slide now, Michelle, is an unlimited tax general obligation bond. And it's different than the bonds that we've issued for example, for the fire project, in that the bond fixes the amount of money, or the approval from the public fixes the amount of money we can issue in the bond. So it would say in the language, we are approved to issue $12.5 million in bonds, no more, no less. The difference between that and in the past is that in the past we would just ask for a millage rate that generated a certain amount of money, and then we'd have to kind of decide how much we could afford to issue in the bonds based on that millage rate approval. In this case, the bonds amount is set. The millage rate is estimated up front, but it can float a little bit based on where our taxable value goes. And it is an estimate at this point. We need to recommend that, or remember that. This couple of things to note about this type of bond is that in the past, when we've issued what are called, or the bond, for example, that we issued for the fire station, that millage that we levied for that was subject to capture, tax increment financing capture, by our DDA, our Brownfield Authority, and I think the the Corridor Improvement Authority as well. So kind of what that means is if the millage is generated $1 million a year, all three of those entities take their cut first, and maybe then we get $950,000 to pay for the bond payments on those projects. In this case, with this type of bond, it's not eligible. The millage that goes with it is not eligible for capture, so that helps to reduce the amount of the millage rate that needs to be requested, because we don't have to cover that gap in addition to the bond payment. This millage is not subject to the state law that allows cities to issue up to 20 mills. Our city charter originally allowed for 15 mills, but over the years we've approved the bridge millage, the fire station millage, and then the roads and trails millage. So what's approved under that 20 mills at this point is 17.99 mills. So you really have about 2 mill gap there that if we wanted to go further with that, that's where we're at. This millage is not subject to that, so it doesn't affect that 2 mills. It's still available under the 20 mill cap. This type of millage is not subject to approval by the Attorney General, which helps to make us a little more efficient in terms of, and timely in terms of getting the millage approved and ready for the ballot. And then in your packet, you do have, I think the last 3 pages are a draft of the resolution. It's a early draft. I highlighted three areas I wanted to go over with you. But in the first section, it kind of describes that these bonds would pay the cost of acquiring, constructing, furnishing, and equipping. And this is the part that's not finalized yet, a new police facility to be part of a public safety complex. So that wording is not finalized, including all site improvements. So we need to determine what wording exactly we want to go in there. On the second page, there's a section where the estimated millage rate that's calculated here basically says that our financial advisor, PFM Financial Advisors, finds the millage or calculates the millage in here to be reasonable based on the estimates that are available at this point in time. And then the last page is the actual ballot language, again with a section highlighted in the middle that needs to be finalized. But essentially what it's saying is that it's asking the voters to approve issuing bonds in the amount of $12.5 million by issuing unlimited tax general obligation bonds. And it would be payable, it'd be basically a 20-year bond payoff, but it's 21 years because of the construction timing of it. And then again, there's the wording there, a new police facility to be part of a public safety complex. That's the part that needs to be finalized. And then based on current available information, it's saying that the first year millage rate would be 0.98 mils. And over the life of the bond issue, the average would be 0.97 mils. So that's what would, again, based on current estimates. The thing that is different with an unlimited tax bond like this is the millage rate can change. So if our taxable value goes up higher than what's projected for these numbers, which is very conservative, it's only projecting about a 1% increase per year in future years. And it does take into account what's currently in effect for the tax appeal, that settlement that was entered into. Though that millage rate could go down. On the other hand, if taxable values are worse than that, it'll go up. It floats like that. But as I said, it is pretty conservative where it's at right now. So that's the language that you're expected to see, I believe, at the next city council meeting on August 1st. And I will say that, with the bond market right now, you've all heard that the Federal Reserve is increasing interest rates like crazy, trying to get inflation under control. Well, that affects the bond market as well. So interest rates are on their way up. And for this assumption, we assumed a 4.5% interest rate, which is pretty high at least in my, I guess as far back as I can remember the city issuing debt here. But we won't know where that rate's going to be until sometime next year for sure. But that's what it's estimated at right now. And there's other things that play into that estimate as well. I mentioned taxable value. That's a big thing. Probably the other big thing. We don't know for sure where that's going to be year after year. So that's what it looks like right now, and what's going to be recommended. And answer any questions you might have.
Thanks, Ed. So regarding the cost estimates that were reviewed, as well as the projected financing and bonds, any questions from council? Brian?
The Third Street parking lot cost is not figured in the hard or soft costs, correct?
The hard cost.
Yeah.
Okay.
Down at the bottom of there was a note that said it. Note 2 said the Third Street parking lot cost is $552.
So that's part of the 14.5.
Yeah.
Okay.
Patrick had said.
Take the 405 and then add in the contingencies and all the other percentages that go along with it. That's how you get up to that.
So let's say the 12.5 is basically, we're asking that because we're expecting the 2 million in contingencies possibly to drop off. Would that be accurate in saying that?
It's a possibility. And
if not, that's going to come from within.
Correct. if we do have to spend all that contingency money, then yes, we do have funds that I mentioned that would cover it. If we don't have to cover it, then those funds are available for other things.
It's not really not need, I'm sorry, it's really not much different than how we handled the fire station. We knew we had some contingencies, we had some money set off to the side if needed and necessary, and frankly, we never touched it. In fact, we ended up having more capacity than the bond issue itself, so we really never brought any other funds into the project itself. But, you know, we do know that with these contingencies, we got these other sources that if need be, we can incorporate into the project once we get what the bids come in at.
Well, where I was going with that is basically, when we've had millages in the past, we've had overrun there as well, where we didn't utilize it
Yeah.
from the millage, where we put it into some other fund or we put it into something else. Is that some kind of statement we have to make as far as how we draw from this millage?
No, and I think, I don't know, Ed, you want to take a shot at it? Because the bond attorney made it very clear that the only thing you do with this is the debt,
Right.
period. Whereas, for example, the bridge project, some of the surplus used to pay for some of the, that's not the case here.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, yeah, what you said is absolutely right. This millage pays for the debt payment and that's it. We're allowed to keep, I think it's 150% of next year's bond payment we can have in reserve, but beyond that, we are not allowed to keep any of the money in reserve. And at the end, if we do have money in reserve, we would have to refund it to the, we would have to do a refund, yeah. So.
Okay, that was my question. Thank you.
Other questions? Oh, Andrew.
Thank you, sir. Regarding the $2 million in contingency left over that Brian was alluding to, would it be prudent because we want to be honest with the voters, and we also want to make sure that they're aware that, hey, we're not asking for more than we need, and we also don't want to pay interest on money that we're not sure that we're necessarily going to need to commit, but the city is going to commit up to $2 million in additional funds to cover the contingencies. Does that need to be in the ballot language? Because that's additional expenditures that's going to come
It doesn't need
from
to
the
be,
city
no.
to this project.
No, it definitely does not need to be in the ballot language at all. I mean, it might be part of your campaign, you know, tell the voters the facts about but in the language itself, no, it doesn't need to be in the language at all.
Okay.
Other questions? Thanks. Oh, Kelly.
I don't know if I'm getting ahead here, but are we gonna talk more about how we're gonna present to the public?
So,
That's definitely part of what we need to do.
Haven't, but you do have to have, if council goes forth and request approve the ballot language, obviously there's information that goes out that'll be available for the public to explain the project itself. And in many ways, it's not going to deviate much from what was presented tonight. You know, here's the rationale for associated. Here's some of the other considerations that alternatives considered that got us here. And you know, you may have something like, you know, one of the questions why is this, you know, higher than the fire station? Well, one, you've got a 60% plus jump in the square foot construction cost. And two, I think it was before my tenure, but we knew that when they were looking at a joint police fire station, that the police end of it was going to be higher. So you've got more cost there. And the borrowing cost, that was 3.3% for the fire. So there's a combination of all these factors. So if anybody asks a question, there's your answer. That is today's reality that for this project. So, but clearly, I think, and the last thing with the steering committee is, you know, Ms. Egan made clear, like to meet with everyone to make sure that we had all of the talking points needed, any questions that maybe come about, so that we make the communication piece as comprehensive as possible.
thanks for asking that question, Kelly, because I think we did discuss a little bit at the committee level on this. And, you know, the first step, of course, is the council digesting this and then coming back at the next meeting. And the first decision to make is, are we going to place it on the ballot and understanding what those bonds would be? I think it gives also at that time between then and now and after is the communications plan with the communications director, but also council and other members. So we have the thoughtful process of what the questions may be and make sure we have an appropriate answer to inform the public about, just as the presentation did, is the circumstances, the whys and how it's going to be and the intent and purpose. So I think your point's well taken because we did talk about it at the committee meeting. And I think we do have to have a straightforward, direct, honest, as we've done in the past in our other proposals we do with the fire station, about what that is and whys, and we have the answers to what we might think be coming up. Kelly, another question?
Two things I was recalling, and I might have lost some of the recall. When we did the fire station, I know we had like posters and maybe flyers
yeah.
and things like that. And I think, we really need to
Yeah.
push things, visuals and things like that.
Yeah, I think, clearly Ms. Egan will be engaged in that process. Both Mr. Sell and I are smart enough to step away from that, only to provide information. But I think clearly she's stressed about what undertaking it is, because it is a significant level of detail, and to put it in the various media forms that'll reach as many people as possible. But that's her professional experience and background, and we're going to rely on her to help with that. So
Also, I took a little stab at the ballot language. Somebody can pass it on to Jody, or I could email it to her. But
well, the language is basically the project itself. Description is really what we got to limit it to. Our
yeah,
bond.
just on that line.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah.
That Ed.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a language, and I think there was 3 sections within the final review, and of course then the ballot language. If there's some words that the council think that are for consideration, please forward it on through the manager or through probably, because that it's going to get forwarded through administration to come back in our next meeting for the discussion of consideration for moving forward. So yes, please send those along. I think the conversation Kelly had with the manager there is, there's all forms of the media medium for how we communicate, and I think that all these are going to be essential, just as we did in the past. I think back in the bridge millage, it was a long time ago, but the fire station millage was the same way. And I think it's going to be both things people can put their hands on, and other things will have to be through the electronic media, no question. And so we've heard of communications director. I know that I'm not saying that Ms. Egan's stressing, just that she also needs our support of thoughts and ideas of, as we start to talk that through, as we did at the committee and was mentioned here today, what might be the questions, or if we hear questions or when things come up, that we make sure that we push that forward so we can give one point of communication in responses and how that's managed from our communications director. So excellent points. Thank you. Andrew.
Do we have an estimated budget for the communications campaign for this?
No, we haven't put one together yet, to be honest with you, but we will.
Thank you.
Other questions? Mr. Pastu, anything final or
Well, I think,
thoughts?
again, Mr. Sell alluded to it during his segment of the presentation, administration's intent, and I think that if I could speak for the steering committee, is to put this in front of the city council, the resolution to be considered at the August 1st meeting. And if approved by city council, it would end up on the November 8th general election ballot for the citizenry to consider. So that would be the next step, is bring it back to the next meeting.
Okay, I'm going to go to Treasurer LaVoy, because I know you're part of the discussions with the committee, but from an election standpoint, what Mr. Pastu just said, anything additional or time frame wise?
No, other than if you are gonna decide to put it on the ballot, it has to be approved. There has to be a vote taken at the next council meeting.
Very good.
in order for us to meet the deadline.
Any other questions?
Other than thank, certainly getting it to this point with the steering committee, Tefra and Dan Redstone, as well as AUK and their staff for helping get cost estimates in place, and certainly all the members of the steering committee and certainly on the public safety realm, both police and fire operations for their input regarding some of the design considerations. So other than that, thanks, and we'll have it on the next meeting for approval.
Very good. So that's the only item we have for the work session this evening. We have about 11 minutes, so I think nothing further at this time. We'll close the council work session, and at 7:30 we'll be back for the regular council meeting. Thank you.